These are the 15 most powerful swords in One Piece. Swords are very serious business in this fictional pirate series. However, ranking them is surprisingly simple, primarily because the world has its own intricate scaling system. It's known as the Meito scale, and it categorizes swords into basic grade, skillful grade, great grade, and of course supreme grade, the bestest of all of them. And you would be shocked at just how few swords we've encountered in the series that fit into the Meito system at all. It's a very rare and very special specimen that makes it to even the lowest of the Meito grade. So let's start with the basic grade Sandai Kitetsu, a cursed sword crafted by Kozuki Sukiyaki, former shogun of Wano, and despite being one of the most undisputed, most powerful swords in the world, it only carries a market value of around 50,000 berries, which is roughly half the value of a log pose and approximately 333 cabbages. It's even cheap enough that I've got one. And the reason why this sword is so cheap is because most of its owners are desperate to get rid of it. As stated before, this is a cursed blade, and is said to bring a horrible death to each of its owners. It's not good for me, is it? Of every sword in the world, the one most notable for its sharpness is the Sandai Kitetsu. It packs a much more volatile bite than most, which makes unfortunate life-changing or even life-claiming accidents very easy to suffer. And when Zoro encountered this blade, he decided to test his luck, threw it up in the air, just to see if the cursed sword would slice off his arm. And this gambit seems to have earned the respect of the Sandai Kitetsu because, bear this in mind, swords in One Piece are more than just objects. They are imbued with the will of their creators and take on personalities of their own, with Oda having once even personified the Sandai Kitetsu, showing its very sneaky and deceptive nature. This sword will end your life the very first chance it gets, whether you're its opponent or its wielder. And so it takes someone pretty damn special or pretty damn mentally ill to wield the Sandai Kitetsu successfully. But also within the lower grade blades is Shigure, Toshigi's prized sword that was introduced in the same chapter as the Sandai Kitetsu. However, it's a much more reasonable cutting partner, and its name roughly translates as Autumn Rain. We don't actually know anything about who crafted Shigure or where it's from, but given that it's a katana, it seems fairly likely that it also originates from Wano. And whilst it is quite powerful, the main draw of Shigure is technique, pure technique. It is best put to use by extremely well-practiced and masterful swordsmen, considered to be more of a scalpel than a cleaver. In a contest of raw strength, Shigure will crumble. So for example, Zoro will often use the Sandai Kitetsu to slice through cannonballs. However, Toshigi uses Shigure to deflect them. It just doesn't pack the sheer oomph of the most powerful swords. However, for painfully precise attacks, it will still devastate opponents like nothing else. Which is part of the struggle with Toshigi, who is a sword enthusiast, but a clumsy one and not yet at the level of mastery that her preferred blade requires. And every sword from here requires no less than that mastery because we are moving into the skillful grade blades. And after proving himself with the Sandai Kitetsu, Zoro was given the skillful grade Yubashiri for free from sword store owner Ippon Matsu. He did this as a form of inherited will. Knowing that he, Ippon Matsu, would never go on to become a great swordsman himself, he entrusted his dream to Zoro. Yubashiri's unique feature is that it's incredibly light, and for quite some time it was Zoro's most versatile sword as a result. And speaking of versatility, Yubashiri is also one of the few, if any other swords in the series, that has been completely transformed to become a new blade. Specifically when Zoro and Usopp were handcuffed together during any sobi, Usopp ended up holding Yubashiri and Zoro wielded Usopp himself, naming this temporary abomination the Hana Arashi, meaning no storm. And this might also be a reference to Zoro's father, who was named Arashi. Roanoa Arashi, Roanoa Storm. But unfortunately, this was the last great feat of Yubashiri, because shortly after this, the sword was destroyed by Marine Captain Shu with the abilities of the Rust Fruit, and Zoro officially laid Yubashiri to rest on Thriller Bark alongside the Rumbar Pirate's grave. But next up, we've gone from Zoro to Toshigi, back to Zoro, and now back to Toshigi, because she discovered our next most powerful sword known as Kashu, which was confiscated from the Baroque Works agent Mr. 11. In retrospect, it's insane that a Baroque Works member had such a powerful and valuable sword. He clearly didn't have the skill to use it though, or else he wouldn't have got caught and the blade wouldn't have been taken. Toshigi liberated Kashu as her dream is to take custody of each of the world's most powerful swords so that they can never be abused by criminals, pirates, and other ne'er-do-wells. Sadly, we don't know a lot about Kashu, we've never seen it used in combat, but Toshigi's reaction tells us that this is quite an elegant creation, which is hinted at by its name, meaning flower province, and Kashu is certainly capable of competing on the top levels of sharp metal ling in One Piece. And Toshigi also liberated another of the skillful grade swords named named Yama Oroshi, and we don't have an official image of this one because it happened during the Logtown arc novel. This is a bit of a weird situation because usually the novels there of, dubious canon. They're not written by Oda himself, but the Logtown novel is a bit different because it was based on Oda's notes and desires that he didn't have time to include in the manga. And in One Piece Magazine Volume 6, Yama Oroshi is officially listed as a canon Meito blade, so that's why we're going to go with that. Yama Oroshi means wind blowing down from the mountain, and this is a very big boy sword. It was described as exceptionally large and it belonged to a man named Billy the Orca Killer. So this is the exact opposite of Shigure, which was made as a refined tool, whereas Yama Oroshi was made for cleaving, butchering, and general blunt and violent activities. Powerful, yes, but such a crude tool could never make it past the skillful grade. But what does is the first installment of our great grade blades being the Nidai Kitetsu, which is actually the sword that the Sandai Kitetsu was based on, as Kozuki Sukiyaki sought to create something on par with a member of the 21 great grade blades. However, the Nidai Kitetsu was created by a man named Kotetsu, an ancestor of Sukiyaki who we unfortunately know little about. However, the Nidai Kitetsu is significantly more powerful and also more cursed than the Sandai Kitetsu, with its presence so overt that Zoro was able to sense it without even wielding it. Although funnily enough, the only person to have ever used this sword in the series was, of all people, Luffy. He very non-consensually borrowed it from Sukiyaki because Luffy thought that it made him look more like a samurai, and to be fair, he wasn't wrong. And although Luffy did wield it, he didn't actually use it. He just held it whilst continuing to punch people, and Sukiyaki said that it was disrespectful to so much as touch the Nidai Kitetsu without great reverence. And it can be argued that this sword led Luffy to a pretty horrible fate, as it was still with him right up until his first brutal defeat at the hands of Kaido. But at least the Nidai Kitetsu spared Luffy's life, which should be considered a kindness. And up next is the much more agreeable Amin Nohhabakiri, one of Kozuki Oden's dual blades, which carries the meaning feathery cutter of heaven, a reference to Japanese mythology, specifically the blade that Susanoo used to slay the legendary Yamato no Orochi, which funnily enough, the Amin Nohhabakiri was one of the only swords on all of Wano that didn't get its turn to slice a head off Kurozumi Orochi, who had eaten the Yamato no Orochi devil fruit. However, this was one of the two swords that Kozuki Oden used to scar Kaido, a feat that was once thought impossible both before and even after Oden did it, because it was an awfully long time before someone managed to do it again. After Oden's passing, the Amin Nohhabakiri was inherited by Momonosuke, who was still training to be capable of wielding it properly, and this sword is said to be capable of slicing through the very heavens themselves. All around, it has a very heavenly vibe, quite pleasant, and that's because it was designed to be the counterpart to our next most powerful blade, Enma, named directly after the king of the underworld in Buddhist mythology, and Enma is said to be capable of cutting through to the very bottom of hell. It was crafted by Shimotsuki Kozuburo, who eventually left Wano to settle Zoro's village in East Blue, and up until Kozuki Oden, there wasn't a single person capable of using Enma. I have Enma, it's the heaviest of all of the swords I own. But with both Enma and the Amin Nohhabakiri, Kozuki Oden's range allowed him to slice the very top of the heavens and the very bottom of hell. Effectively, everything. Which is why he is one of, and arguably even the greatest swordsman in history. However, it would ultimately be Zoro who would inherit the legacy of Enma, and doing so showed Enma as one of the most treacherous blades to date. One that puts its wielders through merciless life or death tests, and can drain lower class swordsmen of all of their haki, leaving them a lifeless husk almost instantaneously. Enma is by far the most difficult sword to wield in the series that we know of so far. Because the Kitetsu, yeah, they're said to curse you with a horrible fate, eventually. But Enma will eviscerate you from this world just by touching it if you are not worthy to hold it, maybe even if you are. Because Kozuki Oden and Zoro are literally the only two people this is heavy. I'm gonna keep that in there because I am not worthy of Enma. Point proven. Because Kozuki Oden and Zoro are literally the only two people in history to have successfully cut something using Enma. It's also one of the few blades we know of that is capable of going directly up against swords in the supreme grade category and genuinely hold its own. It's also been suggested that Enma has the potential to increase its rank as a sword to move up to that supreme grade. However, it requires the user turning Enma into a black blade. A great example of which is Shusui, the national treasure of Wano and the sword that was used by the legendary samurai Ryuma, a sword which made its way into the greater world after Gecko Moria stole Ryuma's corpse. I have Shusui as well. Black blades are known as the strongest and most durable swords on the planet. Thwack. That was unimpressive. You disappoint me, Shusui. But there is almost nothing, if anything, that can cut a black blade. And we're not entirely certain how they're created, but it seems likely that the black coating is a method of haki imbuement, a skill that only the greatest of swordsmen in history are capable of, like Ryuma. Shusui has been noted as being very heavy and a particularly bloodthirsty sword, often causing far too much destruction, leaving most swordsmen incapable of using it to any decent degree, and it took Zoro 2 2 years of training with Mihawk to really get comfortable with Shusui. Although it was noted that after this period, Shusui became Zoro's favored blade to use. Unfortunate because he had to return it to its resting place during Wano, but Zoro did get Enma in exchange, and now has the chance to cement his legacy by crafting a black blade of his own. But he is also in possession of the Wado Ichimonji, which was also made by Shimotsuki Kozaburo, then passed down to Koshiro, then Kuina, and of course now Zoro after Kuina's unfortunate incident with Down D stairs. So Wado is a very special sword. Its name is quite unique. It means straight line through the path of harmony. That's not straight. That's not straight. Sword in general isn't very straight. And while the Wado has been very quiet compared to its contemporaries, it has been theorized that the Wado is actually responsible for Zoro's horrible sense of direction, because wherever he is, Wado is always guiding him to the path of harmony. Harmony being an option that Zoro almost never takes. Hence why he gets along so well with all the cursed swords. But the Wado Ichimonji is also one of the few swords that have been valued in the One Piece world, coming out with a price tag of 10 million berries, which I personally think might be an underestimation for a sword that withstood a killing blow from Mihawk's Yoru, which we'll look into in a bit. But before we get into the top 5 most powerful swords in One Piece, there are still some honorable mentions. Trafalgar Law's sword Kikoku is also a confirmed cursed blade. However, we know next to nothing about its capabilities as an actual sword, because Law always uses it in conjunction with his devil fruit abilities. Surprisingly, it's also not a graded sword at all. It doesn't exist on the Meito scale, at least not that we know of at the time of this recording. And the same goes for Shanks' sword Griffin, which if I had to guess was almost certainly a member of the Meito, because it has been used against a supreme grade blade in the past to equal results. And it should also be said that Shanks' probable father relative Man-Figurant Garling also has a Griffin-like sword. Another one that I wouldn't count out is Shiryu's Ryu, meaning Thunderstorm. It's a very long Nodachi that measures an insane 3 meters in length, and despite its size, it's intended for extremely delicate and precise use. Also, I feel like I'd be remiss not to mention Napoleon, Big Mom's sword homie, who outside of this ranking system would probably be considered one of, if not the single most powerful sword in the series, but it's a bit unfair because most of that is due to being a homie and not the actual craftsmanship behind Napoleon's shell. But with those out of the way, here are the top 5 currently confirmed most powerful swords in One Piece. The first of which is the Yakuza Kasen, used by Marine Admiral Fujitora. So the naming of this one is a bit odd. It means Yakuza firing line, and that's a reference to the 1972 Shin Yakuza Heitai Kasen film, which starred Shintaro Katsu, the real-life model for Fujitora's character design. Its style is a Shikumizue, and its most distinguishing feature is that it has no guard. The reason being that Shikumizue were often used as concealed weapons designed for stealth and surprise. The idea being that the user of this blade isn't anticipating an extended battle, and removing the guard also makes it much lighter and faster. And being one of only 12 supreme grade swords in the world, the Yakuza Kasen is a source of pride and joy for its origins of Wano, having been crafted by Fugetsu Kisaburo, ancestor of Fugetsu Omusubi, who was one of the 3 samurai that got trapped in a cave with Yamato. However, it is not the ultimate source of Wano pride. That honor would likely go to the Shodai Kitetsu, the original member of the Kitetsu set made by Kitetsu himself, and the sword that both the Nidai and Sandai Kitetsu were attempting to copy. Historically speaking, this is the oldest known sword on this list. It's difficult to put an exact date on it, but we're looking at an age somewhere close to a millennia. In terms of power, it dwarfs the 2 Kitetsus that came after it, and it does so physically as well. It's often difficult to see in the series due to perspective, but the Shodai Kitetsu is a very big boy, and it's currently wielded by Saint Ethan Baron Venus Juro, one of the 5 Elder Stars and highest authorities on this planet. As with the other 2, the Shodai Kitetsu is cursed. It's very cursed. However, Ethan himself has essentially made a deal with the devil already, so an extra curse, what does that really mean to him? The Shodai Kitetsu couldn't kill him if it wanted to. Now, for a sword that means a lot to a certain someone, we have reached the pinnacle of sharp metal with Ace, the blade used by the former Pirate King Goldie Roger, and a sword that Roger loved so much that he even went so far as to name his son after it. This is also the sword that has demonstrated the most powerful blade attack we've seen to date, which is known as Divine Departure, whereby Roger infused an absurd amount of his Conqueror's Haki into a horizontal slash, although it should be noted that this attack has since been replicated by Shanks using Griffin to great effect as well. Roger used Ace for almost 3 decades. It was the key weapon of choice for the former Pirate King, and Oda has drawn this magnificent specimen personified as well, and if you're curious, personified Ace is very coyly saying Divine Departure. Ace is also one of the only Meito swords in the series that was not modeled after a Japanese template. Instead, Ace is a very classic pirate cutlass. Meanwhile, Whitebeard's Muruku Mugir isn't even a sword, really. However, it is recognized as a supreme grade blade, the only one we currently know of that isn't a sword. Instead, it's Naginata, and its name means Gathering Clouds Cutter. This is potentially a reference to the very first time it was used in the series, series, which was when Whitebeard clashed with Shanks, resulting in the sky splitting above them. And due to it being very much not a sword, opponents of Whitebeard often found it very difficult to fight against, because they were used to fighting against more traditional sharp metal. And after at least 3 decades of use at the highest levels, even when Whitebeard's body was crumbling from age and wounds, Muruku Mugir was pristine and spotless until the very end. It's currently been retired and rests at Whitebeard's grave, and at a glance, you would never know that it had ever been used in battle at all. It is just that well made. So much so that there is only one blade on this planet that could possibly top it. And that would of course be Yoru, the favored weapon of the current world's greatest swordsman Drakeo Mihawk. This colossal specimen, likely based on a Kriegmesser, is over 2 meters in length and actually taller than Mihawk himself. As you may have noticed, Yoru is also a black blade, the only confirmed black blade in the series to be on the Supreme Grade level, meaning that this sword has been completely maxed out, and until further notice, it is without doubt the most elite blade in the entire One Piece world.